Today, a damning report says England's social care system is under extreme stress and needs a radical
note that not all adult social care spending goes on the elderly.
Work together to protect vulnerable adults.
Social workers walk into the burning house and tell the people who are sat in the front room, this whole place is on fire.
Hello and welcome to Teesside University's Social Work Matters podcast. The idea of this podcast is to discuss, explore and reflect on issues that really matter within contemporary social work practice. We'll be speaking to academics and students from Teesside University and beyond. We've got an extra special episode for you today, celebrating World Social Work Day, with none other than social work superstar Siobhan Maclean. I wondered if I could do a bit of a this is your life potted history introduction to start us off. Is that all right?
Then, yeah.
So you're a social worker, you're a practice educator, trainer and writer. And I was really tickled by something you were saying to Vicky at Social Work Sorted about, your careers advisor, their best efforts to try and get you to join the Navy when you left school. But you stuck to your guns and you ended up studying social work, which you said you always wanted to do. You couldn't remember not wanting to be a social worker. And you said you were particularly drawn to sort of working with people with learning disabilities, I believe.
Yeah.
And something interesting that you've mentioned is when you were training, I think you had a theory and practice assignment, maybe an essay that you failed. And you've spoken about the motivation, like that being a motivating force for you to sort of demystify theory for people.
Yeah.
Which I've certainly found really, really useful. And I know my students have. Mm-hmm. And then you've spoken about the fact that, because you worked in a variety of social work settings, but then in 2013, you had a stroke and you stepped away from case holding. Mm. And you wanted to, continue your work with social workers, and you've said you are a social worker through and through. It's not what you do, it's who you are. So you continued your work as a practice educator, mm-hmm. and you've written books, and you've set up this ethical publishing house. And then just on a more personal note, I wanted to say that when you started your webinars in lockdown, I started teaching at Teesside University, and so that we kind of both started something in that period of time. And I was thinking about how the sort of social pedagogy that you talk about, just how that's influenced me as an educator, because you've unlocked stuff for me as a social work lecturer, not just for my students. And, I'm really excited about chatting to you because you just have been so helpful to me. Just want to start by saying thank you, really.
Oh, that's really nice. You've obviously done a really good social work job there of finding out lots about somebody. It's like, I think the theory of informational power, isn't it? You've got all of that information. You've gathered all of that.
And Siobhan, I wanted to, because something that I love about what you've done in some of the webinars, when you've talked about music and relating that to, like, kind of remembering things about theory in association with music.
Yeah.
I asked you, I didn't give you very much time for this, so I'm really sorry. But I asked you to maybe think about a song that might reflect at least a part of your social work journey. Given all that you've done and all that you are doing, it might be difficult, but did you have any ideas about a song that reflects anything about your evolution and your social work journey?
It's really interesting. It was a brilliant question. I thought really, really interesting question. And the one that jumped straight to my mind, Rachel, and it, again, interesting because of what you've just said, but the one that jumped immediately, I read it and immediately I thought about Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall. And it took me right back to being at school.
Okay.
I tied the tie round my head, dancing in the school disco at lunchtime. Who knows why? Just took me back to this memory. I must have had a lunchtime disco or something, at Christmas or
Brilliant.
something. And dancing to "Hey Teacher, Leave Those Kids Alone" like is a line in it, and it really jumped out at me. And it made me think about the fact that in school I kept saying I wanted to be a social worker, and because in those days it was really unusual to go straight from school, and they just had no idea what to tell me, and so I like that "Hey Teacher, leave those kids alone," me being determined to do it, and I did. But so it took me back to that, and I was thinking about, I often think of that song in terms of like radical social work and, social justice and standing up for rights, so I thought about that one, but then I thought, no, that's a bit old now. And then I was thinking, so then I thought of another one. And I suppose in a way it's interesting because I could think of hundreds of songs, but I thought of that one. I wasn't going to mention it until you just said about, when you were at school, you wanted to be a social worker. So the other one that I thought of was brand new. You've probably never heard of it because I think it's so I live in Northern Ireland now, and one of the things that I love about here is in the local community centre, which is run by the community, not the council or anything. And we call them music nights. So they have somebody in between Christmas and New Year. So it was very recent music night. And he sang some of his own songs. I think he's like probably more of a local Irish sort of artist. But he sang a song there that he'd written called Spanish. And it's a song about, and he told the story, and it made me cry. I sat there and I was just in floods of tears, but it's all about social work, and it absolutely captured. So he told this story about, he'd gone to Canada to play music, and he met somebody there who talked about Indigenous populations and what had happened to Indigenous populations from social workers, and how they'd been sent off to residential schools, and it was all about removal of children, and he went to one of the towns called Spanish, which was a really small town where a residential school had been built, and he wrote this song because he said all I felt I could do was write a song, and he didn't know that he's singing this song, and there was a group of 3 social workers, including me, sitting around a table, and all 3 of us were in tears by the end of it. And you can get it, I think it's on Spotify, so if you did want to listen to it, it's called Spanish. And so I ended up buying his CD, and I'm listening to it all the time. It is a really lovely song. But I suppose the reason I thought I'd bring that as an example is because I think sometimes, as much as that 14-year-old me that was talking to schools, careers, saying I want to be a social worker, I suppose my thoughts and my drive into social work was always about social justice and human rights and all of that. But actually, sometimes social work isn't always a force for good. And we do need to recognise that, I think, and understand that sometimes we've done things, like, for example, the residential schools, like if you look at some of the things that have happened in Ireland. And I was really reminded of that recently, and I've written about this, so it's not, I don't think it's anything too new, but when I was a fairly newly qualified social worker, being asked to describe children that I worked with as child prostitutes and getting into arguments in supervision, and I actually ended up leaving working in a children's team because I was refusing to do it. And it was actually getting to the point where I was sent on a course, and the course was called that, and I was being told you've got a learning need. This is what we do, this is, and I left children's social work at that point for quite a long time because of that. And I suppose because the inquiry reports have been in the news in the last week or so, also just reminds me of that, just that we need to really keep hold of that core stuff. So even as I'm 56 coming up, I still keep hold of that 14-year-old, drive to be all about social justice and recognise that. And I think sometimes when you've got a really clear core about you as a social worker, all of the organisational challenges, the political pressures, all of that, it'll hold you in good stead, because there will be times where you're asked to do things that really you feel it's not right, and knowing it's not right and being able to speak about it is important. So I suppose that's it's not a very cheery thing, but that song reminded me that sometimes social work isn't always a force for good as a profession, and as individuals we've got to challenge and influence that.
Yes. It made me think about a lot of things. I was thinking about moral injury on the back of kind of what you were just saying, but then it also sort of made me think, because you said about Canada and you said about it in Ireland. I've often wondered, about the English context in terms of what are we doing, and I'm relating that to children's more than, because my experience isn't with working with adults particularly, beyond the context of them being your parents of the children. So working with children and families, I've often wondered, what are we doing? What are our anchors in terms of values? Like what's happening? And it made me think of a question. I've asked students for questions. I've also asked colleagues, because everybody's really excited that we're doing this. And this was a question from a colleague. It's really broad,
Okay.
but it sort of speaks to what I've just said. And it's from my colleague Deb. And she said, I want you to ask Siobhan what she thinks about how we're approaching social work in the UK. And if all bets are off, how would she do it differently?
That's a really interesting question. I love the if all bets were off.
Yeah.
What do I think about how we're doing it? I think we've become, and again, not wanting to be overly pessimistic, because there's some brilliant social work, but that's more the individual social workers, I think, than the system. The system, I think, isn't brilliant now. And what would I do? A lot of the processes and procedures could be really pared down a lot more. We could enable professionals more to make decisions, to be more creative in practice, rather than it being, you've got to do this, then you've got to do this. And then, and I think one of the problems is every time something's gone wrong, there's been another process put in place to try and prevent that. And we've ended up with all of these too many processes and procedures. So I'd slim those right back.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say, some people say, well, let's get rid of all paperwork and documentation. I wouldn't say that, because I think people have a right to understand what we're doing, and we need to write about what we're doing so that in years to come they can understand that. So I wouldn't necessarily get rid of the record keeping, but a lot of the processes and procedures. I also think, this is just a very personal view, but I think that the social work role in the UK has been really narrowed down. So when I first qualified, you worked with either children or adults, and that was fairly new. Prior to that, it'd been you worked with everybody on a patch, and that was it. Whereas now it's become, there's children in care, there's this kind of children's team, there's that kind of children's team, and everything seems to be, there's arguments about in learning disability services, which is still where my love lies. You've got, well, this person's got a mental health, so their mental health, or this person's got, and at the heart of all of this is a person.
Yeah.
And very often you've got organisations arguing about responsibility. And sometimes I just feel like if you just didn't do all of this, you didn't have all these meetings, you just did what's right for that person. So I think I'd get rid of a lot of that. I'd widen the social work role. I'd enable creativity more. And that's, that's what we've done a lot internationally. Scandinavian social workers are much more hands-on, much more creative. So I think I'd enable that, and see it less as a technical skill and more as a creative heart work. I think it's work that comes from the heart rather than technical work. So I think that's probably the main thing that I would do. And I don't. People say we need.
It makes me think about. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, a lot of people say we need more resources and more money, but I think if we pared a lot of things down and got rid of a lot of that stuff, the money that's going into there could be just sort of reinvested in more creative work. And I also think just more community stuff. When I first qualified, I remember an early job where there were a lot of women that I was working with who had, postnatal depression. So I set up a group for women, and you couldn't do that now, but I set up that group. It was really, I went a few times, I got it set up, and then it became self-sustaining, and it was there for years, and it really supported women in that local area. And I think if social workers could do that, here's a need, let's bring people together. But we don't enable that now, do we? It's just, no, you've done your assessment, move on. There's too much.
Yes.
Community work.
Absolutely. And also love. I mean, you said the heart, and it made me think of what you've said about love. And I know you've quoted other people talking about this as well, and not least young people, in terms of their feedback about services, care and love. And when I do the values, theories and ethics module with my year threes right at the end, I always bring that up in that module, and the shock of like, love, what are you talking about? We can't say look, we can't. And it's so interesting to me. And I would love to talk to you a bit more about that, about maybe what the fear is.
I think it's about professionalism. I think it's about, maybe are we going to blur boundaries? I think it's a bit of what do we mean by love? Love isn't, sort of intimate sexual love is one aspect. There's so many other aspects of love. And so maybe there's a fear of abuse and abuse of power within that. But to me, love is the foundation of social work. I think it's so important. Because you've taken me back, when you started off with this is your life. When I was 14 and I desperately wanted to become a social worker, one of the things I did was I wrote got the yellow pages out. That's what we had in those days. And I wrote to every learning disability service I could find in the area and said, I want to work in this and la la. And I ended up volunteering at a learning disability day service. And it was actually a long way away because none of the local ones would take me. So I got 2 buses to go there. I was really committed to doing this. I loved it. But in those days, they used to have like industry-based stuff. So there was a woodwork room, okay, and I worked in the woodwork room. I ended up doing a woodwork O-level because I wanted to be able to do that in the future. So I was working in this woodwork room with lots of people with learning disabilities. And when I got into university, so I volunteered there for 4 years, and when I got into university, they made me a chair, and I've still got the chair. So this chair is like 40 odd years old, but I've still got this chair. Well, not quite 40, but almost. And the chair, they engraved on it a love heart, and it's always stood with me of that was my journey into social work and that love. And, all of those people in that room, they loved me and I loved them, and there was nothing negative about that. I'd worked with them for a long time. Some of them had no speech, but they demonstrated their love and I demonstrated my love in a very safe but very enabling way. And I think there's not enough of that allowed now in social. There's too much fear about, you can't say that, you can't do that. And it's, I think it does cut down creativity and it cuts down connections, but we do have to do it safely. I understand that. There's being safe and being boundaried. But I do think, love and kindness is important in social work.
Absolutely, yeah. I would agree with you. You're preaching to the converted there, and I think loads of people who might be a bit frightened to talk about love, will secretly, agree with everything you've just said. And the other thing in terms of reflection and theory, because what you're saying about being safe and being boundaried, to me that is what theory and reflection can give us, like that kind of the freedom to be brave and to try things and explore, but also coming back to not just reflection, but I guess reflexivity. But I wondered, like at the start of your career, do you remember finding reflection difficult, or is it something you've always taken to? Are you naturally reflective?
I don't think I am. I think I've had to really work at it, and I wonder if that's why. A little bit like, I failed that assignment and it made me really want to try ways when I started working with students. I wanted to try and find ways that would help them with that. And I wonder if there's the same there. Yeah. I think I look back now at I had a really forward-thinking practice educator, and at the time you weren't required to do this, but she asked me to. And she asked me to write a little summary of each piece of work I'd done and what I'd learned. And then she incorporated that into her final report. And I've still got that. I've kept it. This is why it's 35 years old, this report. But every now and again, I do pull it out and I look at it and it reminds me where I was. And when I look at the reflections that I wrote, there's like a paragraph on each thing. But I think, really? Is that it? It'll say something like, my reflection on this is I learned about multidisciplinary working and how hard it is. And I think, really, is that all you learn? But then I think, well, yes, that probably is what I learned at that point of my career. But the reflection wasn't sophisticated and in depth. But I think it takes time for that sophistication of reflection to come, and I think we need to learn it. But I also feel like sometimes the way in which we're expected to reflect has, again, a bit like I was saying earlier, become overly prescribed, and you're not really being able to be creative and unique, and what works for one person can really not work for somebody else. And especially when you think about neurodivergence and dyslexia. And I think, so no, I don't think it does come naturally to me. I think that's why I've worked a bit on it and tried to look at it. But equally, I do think strongly, I feel that we are all reflective. Sometimes students will come to me and say, I'm no good at reflection. And I think, no, I don't believe that. I think that the structure that you've been using for your reflection doesn't work for you. But I don't think that I'm no good at reflection. It's just finding what opens it up for you, isn't it? And so looking for new ways of reflecting that's helpful. But I have had to work at it. And I think everybody has to work,
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's something I really enjoy. I enjoy, but it's like a gritted teeth enjoyment. When you're just outside your kind of whatever your zone of proximal development is, when you're just outside, it's that kind of feeling. I'm always just reaching, and I quite like that frustration. I quite like that discomfort. But when I'm speaking to students about it, I mean, I've got a lot of like current year 2 students. They're so thoughtful and they are so reflective, but they keep telling me that they're not reflective. But they are. I see them struggling. I see that thing happening in them. And some of them, I think, have actually fallen into a bit of a reflexive spaghetti, as John Burnham puts it, I think.
Yeah.
And they've got themselves in knots because it's not that there's not enough, there's loads. Have you ever felt that, like in your working life, falling into that spaghetti?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why what you said, Rachel, about theory and reflection gives us the boundaries. I think it gives us the structure, doesn't it? So I think often when you are tied up in that reflexive spaghetti, it's about finding a structure that you can hang that on. And I think it's also as well about getting into habits. I think after I had my stroke, I definitely had that much more reflexive spaghetti, because even the way in which I think and the way in which I'm able to think has been changed, because I got an injury on my brain, it's changed. And so I think I've had to think a lot more about how do I structure that? How do I check out of it? How do I not? I think some of the new younger students I work with now call it overthinking. I think that's a fairly new phrase, but how do I not overthink this and get caught up in the spaghetti? And I think finding a structure, I do and I still do it, just a check out at the end of each working week, and I'll use different but quick checkout activities. Like I might look at what's been the positives this week, what's been the negatives this week, or what word would summarize my week. Or so I'd use very simple structures of reflection to check myself out. And sometimes, especially if I'm writing something, and at the moment I'm in the middle of writing some new stuff around theory, and I'm trying to get lots of love in there. I'm trying to put lots of that in, and it's not there in theory. I'm trying to get it into the theory. So sometimes I'm getting myself tied up in knots about that at the moment. So again, just finding a structure, so I might be writing over the weekend and then training in the week, and I'm in the shower and I'm full of ideas. I've got all these ideas, but they're going all over the place. How am I actually how's that going to go into some action? How do I untie the spaghetti? And I think you just do that by finding a structure that works for you, don't you? But it takes you a long time to get that structure and work out what works for you, because what works for one person won't work for another person, will it? Because it's thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you have sort of mentors, I mean, maybe people who impacted your practice, and maybe they don't even know the extent to which they impacted you and your practice, or maybe it was a conversation that you were able to have with them, but just in terms of mentors helping you make sense of the noise.
Yeah, there's been a couple of really good supervisors that I've had, and I think, and I've told them how much they've influenced me and my thinking. So, yeah, a couple of really good supervisors. One who was very early in my social work career, and another that's been sort of more recent in my career. But tell you the people that have had the most impact on me is students. It is student social workers that have the most impact on me and my thinking, and I'm not sure they always know how much they've influenced me, and that's maybe something I should be clearer about. But you know that. When we finish this today, my next appointment is I'm going into supervision with a student that I'm practice educator for at the minute. And we've only had 2 supervision sessions, but she's really got me thinking and made me think about lots of ideas, lots of new ways of looking at things. And that's really influenced me. The last student that I worked with was absolutely amazing, and in terms of what I learned from her, I'm sure I learned more from her than she did from me. And I think that's the thing about working with a practice educator, is it's a shared learning experience. And I think as maybe it's more because the more experienced I've become, people with experience, I'm not getting as much from them because I've probably had similar experiences. I've got that extent of experience. Where I'm getting the learning from now is from students who will ask questions that on the face of it could look quite naive, but when you unpick it, wow, that's an amazing question. Yeah, it's really made me think and explore.
Yes.
So I think students.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that. I've absolutely loved working with students. And that thing that you said about the naivety of the question, or on the face of it, could seem, and you actually go, oh my goodness, we're just not answering this, like in terms of, the literature that's available, or that, they've really got to the heart of something that's like, wow. So yeah, I love that. I guess I also wanted to ask you about your hopes for the next generation of social workers, because obviously you're working with students directly and indirectly. You're influencing things. It's not just that you're observing and sort of like relaying the information. You're an influencer as well. And I wondered about the hopes that you have for new social workers in terms of the direction of travel of the profession.
Well, I think we've only got an hour, and it would take me a lot more than that to do the hopes for. But so I've got lots, but one of the main hopes that I've got, I think, is maybe it's more of a wish. I don't know, but I wish that sometimes students will say to me, "Oh, I didn't get a social work placement or something," and well, you did, because you're on a social work course. Your placement is a social work placement, but of course, what they mean is not statutory. Everybody looks at social work as being, it's just a statutory task. It's just this local authority task. And I hope that in the future, we'll be able to see that that's not the case, that social work happens in so many places, and that you don't have to be employed in a local authority. That's a particular kind of social work. But let's open it up and look at how do we bring social work into the other areas where it's really needed and necessary. I saw just recently, there's a number now, I think, of the energy companies in the UK employing social workers, and a couple of the energy companies have actually got a full team of social workers. And I saw, I think it was Octopus Energy last week, were advertising for a really experienced social worker. They wanted a social worker who, was also an AMP and also a practice educator. I thought that's really interesting because, if you were in and in the job spec, because I looked at the job spec, because I was interested in it, not in the job, but, just in looking at what was coming. And it said they wanted this social worker to work with their staff group as well as to work with the customers of the energy company. And I was just thinking, Now that's fascinating. For me, that's almost the future of social work.
That is.
Social work everywhere, you know. And in France, I think that's how it works. Large employers in France have to employ social workers. Like, we don't have that here, do we? But we have occupational health. You know, everybody has an occupational health department. Why don't we have an occupational social work department? Because we should. You know, we should be bringing the social.
That's fascinating.
So I think that's my hope, is that we begin to recognise that social work isn't just this local authority single statutory function, and that we can be more creative, and we can have more of an impact and make more of a difference in lots of other places. So that's probably my main hope. So I suppose that's a plea to the students that you're working with. Don't always look to it's got to be a particular kind of placement. You know, broaden your understanding of social work.
Yeah. Yes, and that really relates to what they think social work is. And that becomes a bit of a feedback loop, doesn't it? Because the more sort of processy and procedural we get in our thinking, and then it kind of feeds into the learning of the next generation. They think, well, I should be doing this, I should be following these processes in these settings. And you're right, if we lose the creativity and the sort of broader view, it'll feel like an illegitimate kind of experience for them, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I wanted to just have a very quick chat, because I know we've not got much time left, but I wanted to have a quick chat about theory, because the way that you speak about theory is really, well, you talk about it as being liberating. You talk about it's almost like a treasure chest, and it's like the last bastion of like free thinking. The way and I love that way of looking at it. It's like it's the one bit they can't control. They can't control how you think, and I love that. And I wondered about theory. Is there a theory that you think is most kind of misunderstood, or misused, or maybe underutilized, that maybe should be more? I don't know.
Oh, there's so many. Honestly, Rachel, there is so many. I think, no, let me see. Some of them, I think, are more, it's about the way it's expressed that for me is a problem. You know, so like social constructionism, the way that's expressed, and people think, oh no, I don't use that. It's very, you know, it's sort of not applicable. But actually, it's probably one of the most applicable theories, because it's all about the language we use and the way that constructs realities. And I always think about, you know, when I was in hospital after my stroke, and people were talking about feeding, and just the way in which that leaves you as an individual feeling, you know, that sort of dehumanizing language, all of that. Well, that's social constructionism, and that's an everyday issue. But people don't see it like that. So I think there's lots that are, the way it's expressed makes it so academic that people just move on from it. You know, we're busy individuals. You can't spend ages trying to work out what are they trying to communicate here. You just move on. So there's a lot that I think are poorly communicated, and I think that's an academic issue. I think it's a problem of academics. But I suppose what I'd say, the main thing I'd say in terms of what's not used enough is, if you look at the theory base, and you know, majority of the theory is developed by white middle class academic men, isn't it? That's where the theory comes from. So I think the theory that we're not using enough is theory that challenges that, that's different to that. So, you know, I love Prospero Tedham's 4D2P model for anti-oppressive practice, and it's a very new model, but I love that. But again, I think, you know, because that's written by a Black woman, is that being sidelined? There's a couple from America, there's a model called SPEAR, which is all about social justice, social work. I think that's a great model. Again, but comes from a Black woman. And I think it's about looking beyond the usual authors. You know, I think it's about that. It's opening up to there. So I think they're some of them. And then at the moment, I suppose I go in and out of different theories become my favourite, but I love like spoon theory. I think spoon theory is a really great theory that people aren't talking about enough. And interestingly, for me, spoon theory should be a social work theory because it's all about, it's very social model led. It comes from the disability community. So it's a great theory. And yet we're not using it in social work, but health are using it when they're doing these new courses that they do now about self-management of your long-term condition, that kind of thing. They're talking about spoon theory a lot. So that one I think is used. Yes, loads of them. Just, look at some of the newer theory, but I suppose then the other thing is, it's also about saying to students, because I said earlier, I learned such a lot from students, is saying to students, okay, what about your ideas? What about, developing a model for yourself? Or so I don't know if you've seen on my YouTube, it's, one I did fairly recently was actually a university contacted me and said, we've had this student did this great piece of work. We'd like, would you meet with her and talk to her about it? So I did. I thought it was great as well. And so we developed it a bit together, and it's called the Lotus model. Now, she developed it for a particular purpose, but I'm now working with the student I'm practice educator for, and we're going to develop a supervision Lotus. So to me, that's a great model, but it came from a student. You're not going to find it written about in an academic article. There's a load of research basis, but it's something that really makes sense and really works. So I suppose the other thing is to say to students, don't undermine your own creativity and your own ideas. Yes, it's no good just coming up with your own stuff, because there is a whole theory base and we need to understand the theory base. But use that to think, well, actually, a little bit of this theory and some of that theory could be really helpful. And especially now, because I think a lot, we started off by talking about COVID and how it changed things and stuff. And a lot of the theory hasn't changed since COVID. It's been around a long time. And COVID has changed the way we work. So we need to reimagine the theory. We need to update the theory. We need to take a critical approach to it and say, but it doesn't really work. I don't know, say, for example, Egan's solar model about communication doesn't work for you because we're just looking at each other through a camera screen. So we can't use that. So how might we need to adapt that to think about our communication online and stuff? So I think students developing ideas would be great as well.
Yes. Yeah. And something about, how powerful it is. The invitation to invite students to be critical. And again, you have to maybe build the house before you knock it down, or maybe, read the book before you tear out the pages.
Yeah. Or maybe look to some of the more international stuff like, was it, well, I don't think it was last year. I lose track. I think it was the year before that we had Ubuntu as the World Social Work Day theme. And Ubuntu social work would be, it's South African concept, but how we might use Ubuntu in the UK could be really interesting. So taking something from one context and bringing it and then critiquing it in this context. I think because we've got more and more international students. So what can they bring from their learning? And they'll have theories.
Yes.
So I think that's really important. And now I think World Social Work Day is becoming more like that. In the past, the themes for World Social Work Day were very Eurocentric. Now we're looking much more widely. So I think this year is Bon Viveur. It's more of a South American concept. And how do we bring that into UK work? It's interesting to look at. So I think that's underused as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of indigenous wisdom and knowledge, and bringing that in, and historically. And it kind of reminds me of what you're saying about students as well, in terms of bringing their knowledge base and inviting that through the door. Like, it's all welcome. Like, what do you think? What are your ideas? Where do those things come from? And it's really changing. Well, it turns it on its head, doesn't it? It turns the old academic hierarchical kind of, this level of evidence is gold and this isn't, it's kind of reshuffling all that in a way that's quite exciting.
So I don't think it's always about the evidence base. Sometimes it's about the power of the people that are developing stuff.
Yes.
Looking at that and questioning that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can you remember when you were kind of, and I guess you're learning all the time, that's what you're saying, the learning doesn't end, but at any point in learning about theory, can you think of anything that really challenged you, kind of in terms of your own existing thinking, in a way that maybe made you feel uncomfortable, like a real challenge in thinking?
That's a very good question. I suppose some of the stuff around when I qualified, there was a really sort of significant movement towards looking at anti-racism, and I think that probably is one of the things that, as this sort of young white woman straight from school who was just coming in wanting to work with adults with learning disabilities, hadn't really thought about anything else. And I grew up in a very diverse area of Manchester, and I think I just sort of came into things with a very colourblind approach. I think I didn't really, well, it's not, what's the issue? Because, I think I was very colourblind, and so I think sort of understanding what now would be called critical race theory, but then didn't have that title, but was just really about thinking about racism and understanding that, I think, is probably the thing that's challenged me the most in terms of my thinking. It's probably that one. That really gave me the biggest sort of personal challenge, I think, looking at that at that time. But otherwise, I don't think I don't. I think what I do is I see theory just as ideas, and sometimes I'll think, well, yeah, I really agree with that idea. Sometimes I really don't see that idea, but I can see that other people see it. I don't like behaviorism at all, but that's because I've seen it used very badly and referred to. People using behaviorism saying, but this is behaviorism, but actually treating people with learning disabilities really badly in the name of behaviorism. So I just don't like behaviorism. Things like that challenge me.
Yeah, we often discuss that in our team. Like, we've got different favourites, different favourite theories, and different ones that we don't want to go near. And I remember that attachment for me, it was definitely the most threatening of any theory, because it really resonated with me in such a deep way and unlocked something. And that understanding of self, and then getting into the reflexive spaghetti and all that. So that was something that really moved me, but it's my absolute favourite. I think it's one of the most misused, one of the most misunderstood.
And that's the thing, is there are some theories that we're going to like and will resonate with us, and others we don't want to go near, as you've just said, but we need to understand why. At least I know why I'm not keen on behaviourism. You understand why it sort of gave some triggered stuff. So we understand that.
I was also wondering, this is kind of moving away from theory, just more generally now, Siobhan, in terms of, the legacy continues. I'm not trying to say like, oh, what has your legacy been, as if it's in past tense. I know you're still doing loads of stuff, but just in terms of like, I don't know what's made you really proud, or what you want to be your legacy. Like, I just wanted to ask you a bit about that in terms of your own contribution.
I don't really know, because I don't see it in that way. I'm just like doing things that I just try and do what I think is going to be helpful. So I do think I am proud of the webinars that we did. We set those up as a kind of just in that moment of crisis when placements were suspended and nobody really knew what they were doing. And I was thinking, I want to help students somehow. What can I do? And so we set those webinars up, and the original plan, I just put a tweet out asking if anybody wanted to help. And that's when the team came together. And the original plan was to do 3 or 4, and we did 100, So I'm very proud of those. And I suppose proud of the team that came together and created those. And what's really interesting is, although we don't do the webinars regularly anymore, we've done a few one-offs, but we don't do any every Wednesday night, because that was just becoming too much, really. But I still met up over the weekend. I went to Manchester and we met up, and that was really good. So I'm very proud of them. the team that did that. But otherwise, I don't know. I think what I'd like my legacy to be is that I grew up in a very working class environment. You know, I was the first person to go to university, all of that. And I think when I first went to university, maybe theory scared me because it did come from this very middle class place, and the language made me feel like I didn't belong there. And especially, you know, school I'd not been supported to that point. And I did always feel like I don't belong, and I'm winging it a bit. And I think some of that was about class, and some of that was about also I was very young, and, so lots of that. And I'd like maybe to feel that I've had some influence as social work education's gone on at helping people to feel more of a sense of belonging, of that we all belong in social work, and we need everybody in social work, and we need everybody's, we need more diversity. So maybe that's what I'd like to think, just that people feel a sense of belonging and that they're not scared of the knowledge base. Don't get me wrong, I don't think we should throw the knowledge base. It's really important to understand it. You've got to be able to understand it so you can criticise it and critique it and develop a new understanding. But feeling that we belong with that and that we can contribute to that, all of us need to feel that sense, I think. And I'd like to feel I've maybe that would be what I'd want as a legacy. Maybe it'd be that.
Can I ask what's your next big venture? What you up to? Can I be a bit nosy? What's up next?
So a bit more writing about theory. So that's my writing at the minute. Developing this lotus so that's sitting up here. Look, there it is, ready to work on with this student. So I want to do a bit of development on that. I'm doing some work on some websites, so having a mysocialworkplacement.com type thing where there'll be lots of resources for people around practice learning. I'm doing this year, actually, I'm going to be doing a keynote at the European Social Services Conference, and I'm hoping that will be about encouraging creativity more for future workforce. So it is that bit about, I really want to bring in the need to be creative. So we've got a lot of movement now, and I understand the movement, and I'm not against it. I'm not against change. I think change is really important, but within society there's a big movement towards artificial intelligence and that kind of thing. And I mean, they're talking about some jobs going altogether, aren't they? Because AI can replace it. And I suppose what I really want to, AI is going to come into social work. There's going to be algorithmic, computerized stuff, but it can never replace a social worker because of the creativity, because of the human connection. So maybe my next big future thing is about looking at that and embracing what can come from it, but also challenging it to think about, okay, so how do we bring creativity into that? What do we do that's, that we can't be replicated by AI, because it just can't be. So I suppose that's the big thing.
Yeah.
That's, I think this European conference is about that. It's about the future of AI and all of that in social services world. And that's okay, but where's the creativity?
Yes, and in terms of relationships and building relationships, and I was thinking about relationship-based practice, I was thinking about therapeutic components of practice. I don't really know where you sit on that, actually, Siobhan. I don't exactly know if you believe in the therapeutic helper model, that social workers should be adopting that, like the therapeutic worker, as opposed to maybe a working relationship that looks a bit different. But AI can't do that, can it? But just out of interest, what do you think about viewing ourselves as therapeutic helpers, as social workers?
Well, I think there's a role for therapeutic social workers, but I don't think all social workers should be using that sort of therapeutic relationship, because I I do think that, I suppose, again, this comes from the learning disability background and the love that I have for that. I think what happens is things become over-therapized. That's probably not a word, but, instead of, if I wanted to do some amateur dramatics, that's what it'd be called. It'd be called amateur dramatics. I'd join the local AmDram. Whereas if you've got a learning disability, it becomes called drama therapy or something. And I don't think everything doesn't need to be therapy. It's just about relationships, connectivity. It doesn't need to be therapy. There was a student I was working with a couple of years ago, and she said, as part of her induction, she said, and then I went and did an observation of the bounce therapy, and I was like, bounce therapy? It's just trampolining. This group had gone to a trampoline park, and it was called bounce therapy, and you just think, what? It's not therapy. It's just, it's bouncing up and down on a trampoline. Yeah. So I think things get called therapy. It almost makes it sound like you've got a problem. You've got a medical model. Therapy is about medical. So I think there's a role for therapeutic social work, and of course in America that's the whole model now, isn't it? So we got case management from America, and now we're getting this therapeutic stuff over. There's a role for it, but it's not, I don't think it's how every social worker should see themselves. That's my thinking.
Yes, that's interesting. And if we replaced like healing components of relationships, of working relationships, I wonder if that would take it away from medical. Because when I think of therapeutic, I think about healing more than. But yes, it does have a tradition that comes from kind of the medical model. But have I heard right that you are setting up a retreat, like some sort of, is it a retreat or a therapeutic something for social workers?
Yeah, it's already set up. It's already here. So yes, people come and stay. So
okay.
I called it a retreat, but I don't mean that in a sort of therapeutic sense.
Yeah.
It's just that because all my work went online, it meant I was able to live anywhere I wanted. This goes back to years ago, newly qualified social worker, right? And there was an OT on our team, and she left. I was only about 6 months into the job, and she left, and she was setting up a retreat in the Lake District. I don't know what the retreat was for or anything, but I just remember she hit 50, and in those days I think you could get your pension at 50, I don't know, but she hit 50 and she said, right, I'm retiring, I'm going to set up a retreat in the Lake District. And I remember thinking as this sort of 22-year-old, I'm going to do that when I'm 50. I thought, that's a great idea. And then I never did, because I hit 50 and I never did. But then COVID came, you could work from anywhere, and I remembered that I want to go and live somewhere very rural. So now I live in the mountains in Northern Ireland, and still do all my training from here, still do everything from here, working with students over here. But the space it's big. It's a very big house. It's in the middle of it's a very rural area. So we have like 4 bedrooms where people come and retreat, because you're literally in the middle of nowhere.
Wow.
There's lots of space. There's a daft dog that's a kind of therapy dog that will love you to bits if, or leave you alone if you want them to. There's just space, there's a gym, so it's really just people come and do what they want to do. I had a group, maybe you shouldn't, I don't know if I should say this on your podcast, but it was a group from a university, can't remember where, 12 students came, and their university paid for them to come. There was some kind of fund that they could apply
Brilliant.
to in their university, some sort of fund for travel and education, and they came to stay for like 3 nights. They wanted to do some work on reflection, so I did
that sounds great.
Quite a lot of sort of activities with them around reflective practice. They went into we did some of the stuff in Belfast, looking at the peace walls and looking at bias and what unconscious bias looks like in this context. And then I get just people coming to stay because they want to write something up, or coming to stay because they just need a week away where somebody understands. As a social worker, if they come and they say, I'm just exhausted and I've spoken to people and I don't want to see any people, and it's just a space where they can, there's always rooms, there's lots of books about reflection, there's lots of opportunities. So yeah, it's already here, it's already set up.
This sounds brilliant. Sign me up. This sounds amazing.
Yeah, so it's just a nice space, you know, you can walk up the mountains from here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just lovely.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the space. That's what I
What a
have.
lovely thing that you've done there. That's so cool. So Siobhan, our hour, it looks like, is up. And I just want to say again, thanks so much for chatting to me. It's been really, really nice to talk to you.
Yeah, it's been really lovely, actually. It's been really, I didn't feel like an hour. Sorry if I've rambled a lot. It didn't feel like an hour. It was very lovely. Yeah, maybe another time what you could do is actually, we could do it again and we could get students actually coming in as well, maybe. I don't know, however you'd want to do it.
I'd love that.
Yeah,
Yes,
some of the
I'd
students.
absolutely love that. Yeah. Take care. Bye. That's it for today. Thanks for listening, and thank you to Siobhan Maclean. Happy World Social Work Day, everyone. We'll be back next month with more Social Work Matters. Bye for now.